I know we have folks joining as we speak, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We said we would start at 11, so let's do this. Thank you for joining us. I am Jason Dahl. I am a certified financial planner and the director of financial planning at AFS. And with me today, remotely of course, is my colleague Alp Adebeck, the founder and managing partner of AFS. I know we have a lot of individuals tuning in from the AFS 401k side, so I wanted to give a quick reminder that our financial group team is the sister entity to AFS 401k Retirement Services. And although we work closely with each other, we are two separate companies and operate as such. We at the financial group team helping individuals with their wealth management journeys, and the 401k team servicing corporations in regards to their employer-sponsored retirement plans. But today, our focus is a discussion on investing for income in retirement, which is one of our newest presentations that we are excited to bring to all of you. Planning for retirement can be overwhelming, right? As individuals navigate various factors over which there are, let's just say, varying levels of control. There are factors that are out of our control, like market returns, the future of tax policy, legislative and regulatory reforms, all of which, right, there's a lot of news covering those items these days. There are also factors over which, right, we have some control, like how much we save, our longevity to some degree, right, how long we work. The best way to achieve a secure retirement is really to develop a comprehensive retirement plan and to focus on the factors that can be controlled, right? Primarily things like maximizing our savings, understanding and managing spending, and being well diversified from both an investment and tax perspective. Before we dive in, just a quick reminder that we are recording this session, and we will be sending that recording out within the next few days, along with the accompanying handout that we have created for this presentation. Lastly, we're going to move pretty quickly. We're going to try to put a lot of information into an hour, right? So we do want to encourage folks to ask questions at any time during today's presentation, but also know that you can follow up with us. All right, we're happy to answer questions as a follow-up to today's presentation, because we certainly don't expect, right, this to be, an all-encompassing everything you need to know, right? We want to give you some of the highlights, some of the key points to keep in mind regarding investing for income in retirement. Okay. To ask a question during today's session, you can use either the chat or Q&A boxes that's in the, I think it's on the bottom of the screen for everybody. There's a little toolbar there that has a little icon for chat or Q&A. You can pop that up, type in a question. We'll keep an eye out for that throughout today's presentation. I know we also received a few questions ahead of time, so we will also address those. I will say one of our favorite questions is, can I schedule a time to speak with you, Jason and Alp? And yes, we encourage you to directly follow up with us after this workshop if you have further questions, as I already mentioned, but also if you'd like to schedule a time to review a few things over Zoom or the phone. We truly do love what we do, and the best part of what we do is connecting with people and helping them solve personal financial planning puzzles. So please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, so let's get into it here without further ado, as they say. All right, so if any of you have attended any of our other workshops back in the before times in person or any of our online webinars, you've probably seen our hierarchy of financial needs before. And this really stems from probably the most common financial query that we hear, and that question generally kind of falls under the umbrella of what should I be doing with my money, right? Just very broadly, kind of like, hey, what's the next best step, right? What's the next best thing I should be doing with my money? And so this kind of very broad, comprehensive question is what inspired us to create this hierarchy of financial needs. So the hierarchy serves as kind of the framework for our financial wellness program, and we use this hierarchy to help individuals properly prioritize their financial lives. Before exploring the hierarchy, it's important to know really first kind of what your current financial situation is, right? So take some time to review your monthly spending, right? To ensure you know where every dollar you earn is going. Once you have a sense of your current financial picture, think of our hierarchy as your kind of linear roadmap to financial success and independence. The hierarchy begins at the bottom with the most basic, right? Important needs, highest priority items, with each step building on the previous one until you reach the top. I will say, everyone is currently somewhere on this hierarchy. Ideally, right, in a perfect world, you want to fully meet the goals of one level before moving up to the next run. However, we recognize, right, that life doesn't always allow you to move in such an orderly fashion. And many of us probably have one foot on one level and one on another level at any given time, right? Additionally, after successfully making it through the hierarchy, you're probably going to find yourself needing to revisit certain steps, right? To make adjustments, to account for any changes in your life, right? Nothing stays static in this world, right? So change is constant, right? So whether it be salary increases, job changes, new expenses, living costs, all right, just to name a few. So sort of to my earlier point of, hey, kind of before you get into working up these steps, kind of better, you need to first have a good understanding of your current financial picture and kind of your current spending. Well, let's sort of talk about that a little bit. So this is, and where this ties into kind of creating income in retirement, right, is we really want to emphasize how important it is to really understand sort of like, first, how much income do you need in retirement, right? Sort of what's the target? And one of the best ways that we think to kind of first get a good understanding of what your income needs are going to be in retirement, right? Kind of your lifestyle costs in retirement is really understanding what your current lifestyle costs, right? So I'll say one of the other most common questions that Alp and I and our team receives is, well, can I retire? And I always kind of chuckle at that and to say, sure, you can retire anytime you want, right? But it really just depends on how much you want to spend. All right, so it really is that important. That retirement income planning boils down to kind of simply reconciling how much you spend with how much you have, right? And the half of that equation that you must take the lead on is really understanding the spending piece of it, right? Because a successful retirement plan truly does depend much more on how much you spend than on how much you have. If you compare your needs, right, with your projected income, you'll be able to see, oh, if these numbers are in balance or out of balance, and what kind of adjustments you can make to bring them back into balance. So let me do a quick kind of walkthrough of what we're looking at on this slide. So this is just really a quick kind of back of the envelope way of estimating how much you currently spend, right? And as I already mentioned, we think that's a great way to kind of start and get a good understanding as to, okay, how much is my lifestyle going to likely cost in retirement, right? And there will be adjustments, and we'll talk about that, right? But first, and you can do this right now, right? I'm sure some of you just pull out a pen and pencil and piece of paper and just kind of, even if you're just using round numbers, get a sense for, okay, what's your current kind of gross pre-retirement income, right? So, and if you're married and in a relationship, right, think about it jointly. Subtract from that what you pay in payroll taxes, right? Basically, right, payroll taxes have two components: the 6.2% for Social Security tax and the 0.9%.
1.45.
1.45%. Thank you, Hub.
Spit it out, Jason.
Yes,
Spit it out, buddy.
on the Medicare tax, right? And the reason why you subtract that out, right, is you don't pay that once you're in retirement, right? You're paying that now on your income, on your wages. Then subtract out what you're currently saving for retirement, right? Presumably once you're retired, you're no longer saving for retirement, right? So whatever you're contributing to a 401k, the TSP, a 403b, IRAs, or even kind of a personal portfolio that's earmarked for retirement, right? So if you're not paying it in payroll taxes and you're not saving it, well, basically everything else is either being spent or being paid, right, in income taxes or other forms of taxes, right? And so there we just kind of give you a few simple examples, some numbers down below at different income levels. There is kind of one little nuance that's important to keep in mind. You'll see that asterisk there in the small print at the bottom, is that the the Social Security tax, right, is capped. So if your wages exceed the current level of 142,800, well, then the 6.2% only applies on that first 142,800, right? So again, this is a quick back of the envelope kind of approach to first getting an idea as to, okay, let's start honing in on kind of what my current lifestyle costs. So we want to kind of help folks kind of keep it simple, and really start getting an idea. Some of you may have a great idea, but what we often find is a lot of times folks don't quite realize where all the money's going, right? And it's really important to start to get a good understanding. I will note, right, if you see the current annual spending percentage down there, it's not uncommon. You go through this exercise, it's probably going to come out to around 80%, right? Sort of 80% of your pre-retirement income is kind of after you subtract out the payroll taxes and retirement savings. So quickly, to the point of kind of keeping it simple, I do want to highlight kind of the 7 sort of spending categories that we recommend you sort of think about. Having said that, I will say, right, some folks are really detailed oriented, right, love spreadsheets and track their expenses, right, in great detail in that way. And I don't want to discourage you, right, or tell you to stop doing that. By all means, if that works for you, do that. A lot of other folks, that's not for them, right? They just can't get into spreadsheets, right? And that level of detail. So this is kind of where this is coming in, is to help folks think about, all right, we have found that this is a great way to start to sort of break down the categories of your spending, okay? Thinking just sort of housing and utilities, right? So if it's a mortgage payment, or if you're paying, if you're renting a place currently, right? Thinking about that. Insurance premiums, right? Any and all insurance premiums, right? Life, disability, long-term care, homeowners, so forth, auto, right? Just kind of think all insurance premiums. And then think of the money that you're kind of putting away in savings accounts. Some of you might be still building up an emergency savings. Some of you, right, we already talked about, are adding to retirement savings. Some of you are putting money away for kind of goal-based savings, whether that be for, things like college, a second home, or so forth, right? Then think of any of your debt payments, right? I know I kind of, the one potential crossover there is just making sure you're not double counting, right? Mortgage, right? If you sort of included that in housing, well, then all other debt payments, whether it be car payments, student loans, so forth, right? And then it's kind of everything else, right? What we sort of call spending. And for most folks, that can kind of be boiled down to, what's the monthly credit card bill, right? I mean, a lot of us really put darn near everything on a credit card. So that can be kind of sort of the catch-all. So I would encourage you to sort of, if you need a way to kind of get started, use these categories.
And the credit card bill is also a great example where at times somebody will tell us, oh, I don't really spend that much money, maybe just three or four grand a month. I'm guessing I'll spend them. Well, how big's your credit card bill on a monthly basis? Oh, it's about 7,000 or 8,000. Well, that's what you're spending, right? So things won't change as you. Great segue.
Yeah. But some things might change, right? So generally that piece, like I've said, right, the credit card, that kind of just broad spending, generally people kind of continue the same kind of lifestyle in that regard, right? But there might be other things that change. Thinking back to the previous slide, right? Debt payments. Well, some debts may be paid off when you go into retirement, right? Some simple, obvious things like that. So you want to reduce that. But the other side of it that a lot of folks kind of don't necessarily grasp is, I'll kind of say sort of the softer side, right? Of just sort of knowing yourself, right? And just knowing, like, hey, what are the kinds of things I want to do? Where do I want to spend my time? Who do I want to visit? How much travel do I want to do? Right? Whether if you're currently a very active person who loves to travel, well, you're probably going to want to do that in retirement. So make sure you sort of build in a budget accordingly, right? You might say, hey, you know what? For the first few years of retirement, I'm going to bump up that travel budget, right? Flip side, maybe you're more of a homebody, but maybe you would like to be a homebody closer to the ocean or in the mountains, right? And kind of thinking about that, right? So that obviously there are important nuances that are unique to everybody, and we want to emphasize that. And one thing we always laugh. Some of you have probably heard us refer to kind of the 3 stages of retirement, right? And I think it's helpful to kind of think about, like, oh, what's sort of the spending going to look like over the course of a retirement, which could be, right, many years, multiple decades. You sort of, the first stage is sort of your go-go years, right? you're still active, you're anxious, you've got all those trips you've been putting off because you've been working so hard, right? Then you have kind of the slow go years, and then you have the no-go years, right? And the spending, right? We oftentimes see a spike up in the early years and then a slow kind of decline over time of spending, with kind of one important thing to keep in mind is near the kind of in those no-go years, right, where you're not traveling as much, right? Maybe not going out and doing things, so that sort of spending is going down. But medical expenses or potentially long-term care expenses, right? It's really important to kind of keep in mind. And I know I just mentioned medical and long-term care, right? This slide, this number, this is kind of an average from Fidelity that has done like these national surveys to just kind of get a sense for, oh, over the course of one person's retirement, this is kind of the out-of-pocket medical or health expenses. So it's not long-term care. It's just important to keep in mind. But again, a really important kind of, I always like to say, kind of potential monkey wrench in those retirement plans is thinking about, oh, you're right? Am I going to, do I have the budget sort of built in to cover both medical and long-term care expenses?
And a lot of those expenses will be a little bit more back-end loaded too. So you'll
Yep.
see them incur more frequently later in your life.
Yep. I forget the exact numbers, but I've read things like, something like well over 60-70%, I believe, of kind of our lifetime kind of out-of-pocket spending on health-related expenses are kind of in the last like 5 years of life, something to that effect. Please don't quote me. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit, right, and kind of start thinking about the other side of the equation, right? I talked about that balancing act. So far, we've really kind of been talking about the how much am I going to need, right? Which is so important, right? So now it's like, okay, how much, if I'm going to need to spend this, right? Because I have a better understanding. Okay, what am I going to have to fill that need, right? What are my income sources going to be? Well, one of them that I kind of alluded to earlier, right, that we kind of have perhaps the most control over is our own personal savings, right? So this is again not meant to be a comprehensive overview of all the ways of saving, but just kind of a highlight, right? Because one of the most common ways that all of us save for retirement is through our employer-sponsored retirement plans. Whether it be, again, 401ks, 403bs, 457s, thrift savings plans, so forth, right? And we just put here on the slide kind of the current contribution limits. One thing I do want to say, and it's really, it's more common than you think. One of the things that we always encourage folks, right, is to try to strive to max out, right, or max fund their retirement plans. And so these are the maximum funding limits. What sometimes folks get confused with is when they hear us say the term max funding, is they think, oh, I'm maximizing my employer match, right? So if your employer says, hey, maybe we match, the first 3% of your contributions, that's great. That should be at a bare minimum, right? Absolute bare minimum, making sure you're getting that free money. But really sort of over time, and especially as you get closer to retirement, the goal really should be max funding, and that is hitting these IRS contribution limits into the retirement plans. And as you'll note there, when you turn age 50 or older, you get rewarded with the ability to make what's referred to as a catch-up contribution.
I'll say for those that are early in their career and you're just not used to saving money for retirement, probably the best advice we can give you is just start off with 10%. Yep. Get it going, and yep. You can increase it later to get to the max levels. But if you kind of just focus on always saving at least 10% of your income, you'll be a lot better off for retirement.
Absolutely. And I'll just add one more to that, right, is if you start there, then get in the habit of bumping it up 1% or 2% every year, right? Just in little bits until ultimately you're max funding it, right? So I think that's a simple kind of way to approach it. All right, so as we've kind of been talking about so far, right, everything we've gone over today is hopefully a way to kind of get you conceptualizing and moving forward, right, and better understanding, hey, am I on track for retirement, right? But it's all very broadly speaking, right? Sort of the next sort of natural step is kind of running an analysis, right? And this slide is just meant to simply be kind of an illustration of one of many kind of retirement analysis tools that are out there. I know, we use some, our sister entity, AFS 401k has some good tools, right? There's a lot of free ones out there online, but really just kind of the point is, hey, just doing the back of the envelope stuff is a great way to get started, but it's not enough, right? The next step is to, okay, now I need to start plugging in some real numbers based on, right, the envelope sketches that I've done, right? And then thinking about, right, okay, what am I currently saving? What am I going to continue to save? When do I think I might retire? How long, do I think I'll be in retirement? What sort of projected rate of returns am I going to have? What sort of inflation rate do I need to build in, right? There's a lot more to it, right? So this slide is kind of the intermediary step, and then sort of that third step is sitting down with a professional advisor who really does this all day every day, I'll say, right? Who really knows the many different variables and nuances to be thinking about to say, all right, you are on track, but you're on track sort of given this static situation, but what ifs, right? You always need to sort of think about the what ifs. That's the kind of thing that kind of working with someone can help you
And the
think
what
through.
ifs always occur.
They always occur. One of the other kind of concepts, if you will, and I think it's more than a concept now, we've seen it in reality in a lot of cases, is sort of the idea of no longer just sort of, working full time for, 30, 40 years, whatever it may be, and then stopping cold turkey is I'll say kind of the transition or phasing in of retirement. For some folks that may be staying, doing what they're currently doing, but doing less of it, right? Like maybe cutting down to 4 days a week, 3 days a week, right? Whatever that may be. Maybe, or maybe it's doing something totally different, but it's just, less stress. We hear that a lot, right? Saying, I want to stay engaged. I want to keep doing something, but I want to do something that's a little more fun, right? Or just less stress, as I said. Another thing is kind of a test run of retirement. What a novel idea, right? Is perhaps saying, you know what, I need a break. I'm going to take a year off and then maybe look for that next act, that next phase of doing something for a while, right? Just to sort of see, because it's true, right? So much of our life is wrapped up in our personality and is wrapped up in our work. It can be jarring to go all of a sudden to being a retired person, right? And so give it a test run, whether it be 6 months, 9 months, a year, to kind of learn about yourself, to recognize like, oh, actually I do have a lot more hobbies than I realized, or the flip side, I don't have any hobbies. All right. And then, kind of the idea, and, we call it worst case scenario, go back to work. That may not be an option for everybody, right? But that is, something that we see is fake, as a part of whether it be a test
That
run.
worst case scenario, right? You can always go back to work.
All right. So
how are you going to pay for retirement? A question we get asked very frequently. So there's 4 different sources to help pay for one's retirement, though not everybody will have access to all 4 sources. Think of retirement savings, pensions, Social Security, and other investments. On the retirement savings side, that's your 401k, 403b, 457, thrift savings plan, IRAs, and Roth IRAs. Pensions, while almost a thing of the past on a national level, we still see them frequently around DC because of the large population of government workers. Most people ignore it as an asset early on in their career, but it's actually a very valuable, frequently inflation-protected asset. So pensions, the closer one gets to retirement, when you start looking at that added benefit over and above Social Security, really, really very valuable. Social Security is also a very valuable asset for somebody that has paid into the system for their entire career. We are seeing monthly benefits in the $2,500 to almost $4,000 range right now. And that's for somebody that actually delays retirement, to age 70. And so they delay taking their Social Security from their full retirement age to age 70. But these are big numbers that are coming in. And so if somebody's got Social Security and a pension, it's really a nice base. Other investments, think rental properties, annuities, and non-retirement investment accounts. You can be building up money outside of your retirement accounts. We recommend that highly. When it comes to rental properties, really an interesting concept if you like being a property manager. But if you can have a rental property paid off by the time you get to retirement, think of all that rental income coming in without a mortgage payment, and it's usually also inflation adjusted. So when you think about these 4 different buckets, that's generally where the money's going to be coming from for retirement. Next slide talks
Al,
about,
I'm going to interrupt you just real quick. There were two questions I thought were good to address here. I think you actually just answered one, right? One was around someone mentioned they have a house that's almost paid off, and they are looking to move, but they don't want to sell their house and considering renting it out as a source of income in retirement. And in our thoughts, so I think you did a great job of addressing that.
sure, and I'll add one thing, and I don't know if everybody knows this, but my prior career, this is actually my second act, my prior career was as a tax CPA. So one of the things to keep in mind there is it's really, really critical. If you have a lot of gain in your property, if you convert it to a rental property, and let's just say you rent it for 4 or 5 years, and then you decide I'm sick of renting it, you now lose the ability to enjoy that either $250,000 or $500,000 of tax-free gain from when you sell a principal residence. So keep that in mind. It should come into your calculation. If there's not much gain in your property, meaning let's say you paid $500,000 for it and it's worth $550 right now, it's irrelevant. But if you paid $500 for a property and it's worth $1.8 million, I would actually seriously consider selling the property instead of renting it, but
Got it.
talk to your tax advisor.
Yeah, it's a very good point. One of the questions was, are there options for people already in their 60s but still working? I'll just comment here and make, hopefully I'm kind of understanding the question correctly. Right? If you sort of think about this slide, I think is a great opportunity here, right? So the retirement savings piece, you know, if you're still working, still saving, right? To do that, I'll say one of the important pieces there is, right, as you get older and closer to retirement, the money you save, kind of the ability for that to compound and grow, right, is compressed, right? It's not as valuable as when you saved it earlier. But sort of a positive side effect is, hey, if you can increase your savings, that means that you're sort of reducing your spending, right? If you think back to one of the very first slides. And so that can help bring things in line for retirement, right? And then if you're working longer, maybe you can delay if you're going to qualify for a pension, right? Maybe there's benefits for being able to delay starting the pension. We know, as Alt mentioned, there are benefits for delaying starting Social Security, right? If you can, maybe if you work all the way to 70, then you can delay starting your Social Security and start that at 70, right? So those are some of the things to perhaps keep in mind. So thanks for the questions. We will keep our eye out for others. Sorry, Alp, here you go.
Sure. So I'll say a follow-up question is, how much can I withdraw from my retirement savings without fear of running out of money? And this slide does a great job of kind of explaining this. Researchers have come up with what they call the safe withdrawal rate, and it's really simple. It's based off of a 30-year retirement. So think retiring at age 65 and living to age 95. They've back tested this, and what the research shows is you can withdraw 4% from your assets in the first year of retirement, and then give yourself, I'm going to use the term, a realistic inflation-adjusted raise each year. And historically, you would not run out of money over a 30-year time period. Again, excuse me, they've back tested it. Common sense applies. If you retire later than 65, you can increase the percentage appropriately, but the opposite applies if you retire earlier than 65. And of course, things like life expectancy, again, that falls into that common sense part where, you know, at times we, talk to somebody that says, oh, my mom's still alive and she's 102. Well, in those scenarios, you might have to pull out a little bit less if you think there's a chance you could live well into your 90s and possibly over 100 years old. So this was tested using a balanced portfolio. So when you talk about asset allocation, it means they've got about 50 to 60% equity exposure. So you're still holding stocks, just a really balanced portfolio. But it's a simple, realistic way to assess how much you can comfortably withdraw from your assets. And so in our example, we're saying if somebody has $2.5 million of liquid assets, safe withdrawal rate of 4%, they can pull out $100,000. And then in year 2, give themselves, in this example, we threw a 3% COLA, 100, an extra 3,000, so it's 103 total. And year 3, another approximately 3,000. So essentially, they're staying inflation adjusted. We always point out, just because it says you could do a COLA, if you actually had modest expenses in the prior year, we recommend actually not bumping it up, just to give yourself a little bit of cushion later on.
Hey, Alp, it looks like we got a great crowd here. Another great question that's relevant here, I think. So the question is, let's say you have $1 million in stocks and bonds, right? So kind of that total liquid asset point. If accounts are set up correctly, can you just be paid out interest earned off principal and not use any of your principal during your retirement?
So it's a good question, and you have to kind of draw a line between your, I'll call it your retirement assets that are in the 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, et cetera, and your personal portfolio. With your personal portfolio, yes, the answer is really simple. You can actually just have the dividends swept out of one's account, on a monthly basis, or as frequently as you'd like. So if you wanted it to be quarterly, whatever it may be, that's very simple, very straightforward, and not sell the underlying assets. So whether it's dividends or interest, whatever it may be, it's easy. On the retirement account side, there are, once you get, and we'll get to this later, when you get to, I'll call it the required minimum distribution age, which is currently age 72, the rules are a little bit different. You have to take out a certain portion each year. So it's not always easy to just avoid attacking the principal.
And I'll just add one quick comment there. Sort of this safe withdrawal rate actually assumes that you may need to tap into the principal, right? Perhaps that's obvious, but just want to make sure that's clear, right? So over a 30-year retirement, if you started at 2.5 million and took out 4%, right, and had a 50 to 60% equity allocation, right, kind of that balanced portfolio, depending on, and this is another presentation, right, I won't go into too much detail here, but sort of depending on what the returns ultimately are like in your retirement, you may need to tap into the principal, and right, over the course of that 30 years, the 2.5 may come down, right? So, and I will say that's probably the most common scenario for somebody in retirement, right? To sort of achieve that lifestyle goal is they will need to tap into the principal, right? Because sort of to some degree over the course of their retirement.
Sure, and I'll also say that that dream scenario is that you don't have to tap into it, right? If you want to pass it on to the next generation.
Absolutely.
As Jason mentioned, it really is very dependent on how much you actually spend in retirement. So the first two items that all investors need to assess, and I'll say periodically reassess, is their risk profile and their time horizon. Your risk profile consists of three components: your tolerance, your need, and your capacity for risk. And risk tolerance is a measure of how much risk you can withstand emotionally, in a sense, before you crack and yell, "Get me out." And it's different for everybody. We've seen it time and time again in our practice. When it comes to bear markets, there's people at times that crack and they want to de-risk their portfolios, and they usually crack, it's incredible, really close to the bottom after the markets have taken a pounding for a couple of months. Next component you need to assess is how much risk you need to take in your portfolio in order to give you the best chance of achieving your retirement income goals. A great example is someone who is saving for college and they've got the money they need saved, and thus they no longer need to take investment risks. So think about it. If your goal was to have $200,000, save $50,000 a year for 4 years of tuition for somebody, if you've got to that $200,000, you no longer need to take that risk. And I understand there's still some inflation on the college tuition, but the point is, if we have a bear market, you have $200,000 saved, if it would bother you that the account went down to 130 and may not recover by the time the tuition bills start coming in, that's the way to think about it. So, you need to assess it. You also need to review your overall financial situation and assess your capacity to take on investment risk. In other words, can you financially wait while your portfolio recovers? And so for some people, they've got a lot of extra money, a lot of reserves. They might have 4 or 5 years of liquid reserves that they can tap into and let their investments ride out any kind of market volatility. So great way to kind of assess it and think about it. Another thing is time horizon, the next slide. And it plays a critical role in your overall asset allocation. So think about investing early in your career. At age 25, if you're planning on retiring at age 65, you have 40 years before you'll need to tap into your retirement savings. And so in that situation, it's all long-term money and it should be invested accordingly. And a lot of times people say, oh, I'm just really conservative, but you have to think this is long-term money and you have to bet on the markets doing what they've done throughout history, which is always recovering from bad periods. If you expect to live into your 90s, Think of it also that a portion of your money can be invested with a 60 to 70 year time horizon for that 25-year-old, because you're not going to take all the money out in your first year of retirement. The money's going to stay in your retirement account and you're going to take it out every year. The opposite is true the older you get. At age 60, if you're planning to retire at age 65, a portion of your investments should be invested with a short-term time horizon. In other words, conservatively, knowing that you'll be spending some of the money in 5 years. And for those that are working still and have money in retirement accounts, 401ks, and they see these things called target date funds, they're really good to analyze just how they are invested. A 2060 target date, meaning that's the target that you're going to go after year-wise for retirement, that likely will have over 90% in stocks, and some of them will have 98, 99% in stocks, while a 2025 target date, meaning you're thinking of retiring in about 4 years, that's going to have approximately 50 to 55% in stocks. And when you think about it, the way it's set up, the way the target date funds are set up, they make perfect sense, and they'll do all the work for you in those work retirement plans. They'll actually reduce your equity exposure as you get closer to retirement. Next slide. So we get a lot of questions on how should I invest my money now that I'm about to retire or am retired. If you think about the last two slides, the words risk tolerance, need, capacity, and time horizon should help you realize that it's not one size fits all for how you should be investing for your retirement. There are countless investment options available, too many for most people to kind of comprehend in a quick webinar. So I'm not going to try to explain them to you. You can obviously contact us later. We can go over some of them in more detail. It's also because the next slide does a great job of explaining how you should be thinking about investing during your retirement years. It's simple, and I joke, it's worth the price of admission. So aligning your retirement assets based on how they're going to be used to support your retirement lifestyle is a great way to ensure a higher degree of confidence through retirement. And it's known as guarantee the floor. And this chart, this pyramid, really shows it well. So think about your needs or non-discretionary spending and how they can be aligned with a relatively safe or guaranteed funding source, while wants can align to a more balanced portfolio. And if your goal is to leave a legacy, so in other words, you're investing for the next generation, that money is very long-term. You're saying, I don't need that money, so a more aggressive portfolio may make sense given that longer-term time horizon. And again, this pyramid breaks it down really well. You can take a look at the potential solutions to fund your needs, and your goal here is to de-risk the funding of your needs. So let's say your needs cost you $12K a month, and you receive $3K in Social Security monthly and $3K in a pension. That means you need to structure the needs portion of your portfolio to lock in $6K a month from reliable sources. It makes perfect sense. You design the foundation of your portfolio basically to meet those needs, and you move up the risk from there.
Hey, I'm going to quickly address a couple questions that came in. So one was kind of going back to the safe withdrawal rate. Thank you for that. The question is, if you plan to retire before age 60, what percent do you recommend? So there's no kind of perfect answer to, a specific percent, but I will just say, simply put, and I think Al kind of alluded to this earlier, is, right, if you're going to retire, quote unquote, early, which means a longer retirement period, then that withdrawal rate or that percentage should probably be less than 4%. Right, so it's, if there's more years that need to be covered, then you probably want to start looking at a 3.5–3%, right, a kind of withdrawal rate. Again, it's not a perfect science, but that's kind of the logic behind it. We also had a question that we're actually going to cover here in a few minutes around kind of Roth 401ks. So I want to make sure we're not going to skip that. But and then another question that's a great kind of segue right here with what Al was talking about. And the next slide is sort of based on the savings buckets, IRAs, taxable, etc. In which order should you pull money out? Again, there's not a perfect answer to that, right? But kind of the general rule of thumb is, right, is that you want to defer taxes as long as possible, right? So IRAs, Roth IRAs, right? You want to push off drawing money. Well, Roth IRAs is
It's
kind
complicated.
of
It
separate.
depends
Yeah,
how much of a legacy
yeah,
you built. But
yep. That's kind of the legacy piece of it. So let me just sort of talk about traditional, sort of regular IRAs, 401ks, right? Where if you pull the money out, it's going to be taxed to you. The general rule of thumb is, oh, defer that as long as possible, right? In a perfect world, you could defer it until you're required to take them out, right? Your required minimum distributions, which is currently age 72. I keep saying, right, kind of that's the rule of thumb, or in the perfect world. It doesn't always play out, right? There actually might be opportunities to take money out sooner from those IRAs. For example, let's say you retire before you've started Social Security income, and maybe you've retired and moved to a state with no tax income, and so you've got a few years of low taxable income. Oh, maybe it makes sense to actually accelerate some distributions out of the IRAs, right? So there's kind of a general rule of thumb, but there's also the reality is you want to sort of look at it on a year by year sort of tax basis, right? As to, oh, does it make sense to maybe to sort of fill up one of the lower tax brackets, right? To take some money out, right? Knowing that, hey, I want to kind of smooth out the taxes over the course of a 20, 30-year retirement.
you know, I'll generally say for people that retire early without a pension, there really is a lot of, I'll say, planning opportunities for you to consider, and it takes a decent amount of, I'll say, just like thought, like, oh, what makes the most sense? But they're really, you know, it's well worth investigating things like Roth conversions in an early part of one's retirement if they don't have a pension, so they're in a really low tax bracket.
Absolutely. I love this slide because I think it kind of brings together a lot of what Alp was just talking about, right? Whether it be sort of the risk piece of it, right? Like, hey, we know markets fluctuate in any given year, right? So you need to kind of build a portfolio that can kind of withstand that, but also can withstand maybe some of your emotional reactions to it. But also thinking about, oh, just sort of the mechanics of taking money out, right? Structuring that portfolio as to, oh, so where should I draw money out? So what basically what this slide shows us is I'm going to call it sort of three buckets, right? The lower left-hand corner being sort of the short-term, right, bucket, to where, hey, I'm going to keep my very conservative liquid investments here to cover my needs, right? My basic needs that Alp was talking about for, depending on the person, I'll say anywhere from 1 to 3 years generally. I'll say kind of 2 years is kind of the average we often see, is to just say, like, you know what, hey, I know that I need, you know, $120,000 a year, so I'm going to keep $240,000 conservatively invested, right? It's not really going to fluctuate with the markets. Yeah, it might not keep up with inflation, but that's fine. And kind of the idea being that, hey, if the markets do sell off, I don't have to worry about that because, hey, I've got 2 years worth of liquid assets to cover my spending and can allow for the portfolio to recover, right? That's kind of the concept. Then you have the middle bucket there where it's sort of a mix, right? You start moving up the risk curve, as we say, a little bit, right? So where you're going to build out a portfolio that's going to have more fixed income or bonds, or more dividend paying equities, right? Some of the more conservative style equities, to where sort of the goal is, hey, I want that portion of my portfolio to at least match inflation, right? Ideally, maybe outpace it by a little bit, right? And then as you get up to that top right corner, that's where it's the part of the portfolio where you're saying, hey, I need some of my money to actually keep growing and outpace inflation, right? And so that's the piece of the portfolio that's going to be more equity weighted, right? And you might introduce more of the growth style equities there. So now, I know we had a question also around kind of the value of dividends in a portfolio. So Alp, I'm going to sort of turn that over to you as you talk about this next portfolio.
Sure. And so I'll just hit the question on dividends
Yeah.
real quickly. But so I'm a big fan of that. And like that earlier question, I would actually say that my goal would be to be able to just live off of dividends for retirement, and then someday have to take out the required minimum distributions for retirement accounts. So I like that strategy. I will point out, though, the one thing that is different between, I'll say, a dividend-oriented portfolio and something that has more growth in the portfolio is the action over the last 10 years has dramatically favored the growth stocks versus the dividend stocks. Dividend stocks are a great strategy as one gets older, but earlier in a career, there's no question that it's good to be balanced out. And it's also good to have some growth in the portfolio because some of the dividend stocks can really be just fairly static for long periods of time. So when it comes to diversifying, and in order to kind of save a little time here, I'll just hit a few of the highlights here. What the chart's showing you is two different portfolios. And the one that actually has more investment options, and some of them actually a little bit more volatile, over a long period of time, the more diversified strategy has actually given a better return. It's not going to give the better return on a year-by-year basis because you can see at times more concentrated portfolios will outperform, but they will also pull back more substantially in periods where those specific asset classes got hit. But the goal of diversification is to spread the risk amongst asset classes that are not 100% correlated or close to 100% correlated. And what I mean by that, if you're holding large caps, mid caps, and small caps, and they've pretty much traded all in the same pattern, where if they've all gone up 10%, or maybe one goes up 10.5, then one goes up 9.5, they're fairly well correlated. And so you're not as diversified as you think there. But if you actually put in some of the dividend, the example we just talked about, some of those that have underperformed, those typically will perform at different periods than the growth stocks. So the goal is to kind of spread it out so the assets won't move in the same direction at the same time. Another thing we always like to bring up is it's advisable to reduce what we call single security event risk. And we come across this frequently where somebody has built a big position in a stock. It might be some legacy positions. A great example, we have a lot of people that have had GE for a long time in their portfolios. And GE over the long haul has done very poorly. Exxon, another example, they've had these overweight positions. They didn't want to sell them. And so our advice is, you should trim them. Unfortunately, you got to pay the taxes if it's in a gain situation. Typically, if it's a big overweight position, there's going to be a lot of gain. But don't be afraid to take profits and to spread the risk in your portfolio. We've talked about this a little bit. Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, I was just going to mention another question that came in, but go ahead and finish your thought.
Oh, no, I'm going to go to the next one. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Cool. And this could be a very big question, so we'll try to keep it keep it pointed. So, Al, the question is it the best time to buy when COVID is so active?
So I'm going to say that COVID's just another great example that everybody, I'll say the herd mentality, got it wrong. I mean, you should be investing for the long haul, not worry about, I'll say, the shorter term, what's facing us, because if you went back to February 19th of 2020, when the market started selling off and it bottomed out, I believe, on March 23rd, a lot of people were panicking. The market dropped about 35% fairly quickly. People thought it was a horrible time to invest, and the markets are now in record territory despite what happened. So I'm going to say it's almost impossible to outguess it. Markets are up now. I'd be more focused on the markets being at record highs right now as opposed to the COVID situation. And it's tougher to invest new money right now. For money that's already in the market, we're big fans of just keeping it. But adding new money, it's a little bit more difficult right now. You might want a dollar cost average in and kind of buy in on dips.
Related to this slide too, we had another question came in. How do we easily see the portfolio breakdown of growth versus dividend stocks and see the actual total dividend number? Would help to make a strategy decision upon retirement. Totally agree, right? That would that would be helpful, and we can certainly provide that. And just didn't feel that the context of this presentation provided for sort of diving into that level of degree. But you're absolutely right, and we can certainly share with anybody who's interested and have a conversation to address sort of that further breaking it down between dividend stocks, growth stocks, how that breaks across sort of the three buckets that I talked about, and sort of what percentage of kind of the income can be derived from dividends. All right.
And so if we could actually make a note to reach out to that person, that's a good friend of the office. So
yep, absolutely.
Natalie, if you want to make a note on that. When it comes to, I think should be on required minimum
yep
distributions.
Let's get you there. Yep.
So I'll try to be quick on this. Basically, they phase in at age 72. And what that means is at age 72, you have to start taking money out of your qualified plans. This is, 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, but not Roth IRAs. And in the first year you pull the money out, you have to pull out, it's approximately 4% of the total, and it's based on the value of your accounts as of December 31st of the prior year. So if you turn 72 in 2021, the value of your portfolio on December 31st, 2020 is relevant. That's the number that will be used to calculate your required minimum distribution. You can take the money out at any time during the year. You can have it set up to go out monthly. You could have it set up to go out quarterly. You could take it out once a year. There's only one rule, is you have to take it out by December 31st. If you're still working and if you're not an owner of the business, it's typically, I think it's either a 2 or 5% owner of the business. You can, if the money that's in a 401k, some qualified plans allow people that are still working to defer taking their RMDs, even if they're at age 72. So again, you have to look at the plan document. And as I mentioned this already, RMDs do not apply to Roth IRAs. And that's just a great segue into what is a Roth conversion. Most of you know about Roth IRAs or Roth 401ks. Basically, the money in a Roth IRA, Roth 401k, that money goes in after tax, and it will grow totally tax-free for the rest of your life. Certain rules on how long the money had to stay in there, but when you start pulling the money out of the Roth or Roth 401k, that money, regardless of what it grows to, truly will come out completely tax-free. So it's just an awesome type of investment account. And, you know, as I said, if you put it in the Roth IRA, you don't have to take that RMD. So basically the way it works is if you have a traditional IRA account, I'm going to make up a number, $500,000 in it, and you want to convert $50,000 into a Roth IRA, that $50,000 is taxable income in the year of the conversion. I'm ignoring the possibility that you could have what's called basis in it, because that starts complicating it too much. So if you convert like a traditional 401k partially to a Roth 401k, if the rules of the plan allow it, it's taxable in the year of the conversion also. So again, the catch is it's taxable income and it gets thrown on top of your income for that year. So if somebody's making, I'll throw out a number, $200,000 and they converted 50,000, that 50,000 will get thrown on top of their $200,000 of income in the year of the conversion. You have to report it on your taxes. A lot of planning opportunities here. We talked earlier, if the person that retires early and has very low income, you could possibly do the Roth conversion then. If you're planning on moving to a state without a state income tax or already live in a state without a state income tax, the Roth conversion also can make a lot of sense there, especially if your beneficiaries live in states with state income taxes. So think of that scenario where you've converted in a state like Florida, no state income taxes. Someday when you're gone and your beneficiaries live in Maryland or New York or California, when they pull that money out, they will not have to pay tax on it. Really, really beneficial.
And one of the quick follow-up there, we had a question of if my employer has a Roth 401k in addition to traditional, which one is recommended? Now, I'll just comment on that really quickly. Kind of again, the general rule of thumb, the idea is because when you contribute to the Roth 401k, you're contributing to that with after-tax dollars, right? Compared to a traditional 401k contribution where you get the deduction, right? And that's a pre-tax contribution. So kind of the thought process is when you're younger and in lower income brackets, do more Roth contributions, right? The idea is you have more years for that Roth money to grow, totally tax-free, but also the value of the tax deduction is less, right? Because you're in a lower tax bracket. And so sort of as you progress in your career, as you move into higher taxable income, that deduction becomes more valuable, right? So what we often see, and this is actually what I have done over the course of my career, right? Early in my career, I put all my money into the Roth. Then there was a time period where I actually split it, where I did half Roth, half pre-tax or traditional. And then now I currently do everything traditional. And then one other kind of quick nuance to that also is sometimes we see as folks get later in their career and maybe they know, hey, I'm on track for my retirement. Right. And now I'm starting to kind of think about my legacy planning and the next generation. And to Alp's earlier point, right, around having money in the Roth, that's the best kind of money to inherit. We do sometimes see folks sort of say, oh, you know what, I'm actually going to start putting more money into the Roth sort of later in my career.
And one of the things that gives you a lot of flexibility is if you have a traditional IRA if you're like, we're always going to experience, I'll say, market downturns, but if we go into a period that the market's down 20 or 30%, even if you're still working and in a high tax bracket, it might make sense to actually convert a portion of it if you're willing to pay those taxes, because if you're betting that the recovery will always happen, as it has always happened to date, then you could actually have the recovery basically happen in a Roth. So if somebody converted $100,000 when the market was down 35%, when it recovers and is back up 35%, you now have 135,000, of which 35,000 literally is tax-free growth.
We had a question: can you do a Roth conversion after retirement? Simple answer: yes. Really, you can do it at any time, but the strategy is really kind of what we're getting at, as to when does it make the most sense to do it. And then how long can you delay conversion from 403B when you stop working?
I would say some of that, just you have to look at the plan document, and keep in mind you can actually take your 403B and move it into an IRA. If you're going to me, you have to kind of assess what plan might be better for you. But if you roll it into an IRA, then you can do the Roth conversion at any time.
Awesome. Thanks for all the great questions. I know Roth conversions always bring that up. So we're coming up on just about 5 minutes left. We still have a handful of slides here, so I'm going to try to move quickly here. We've touched on this before. I'm just going to kind of keep it short and sweet. Don't underestimate how long you're going to live, how many years you need to fund for retirement. Right. So this slide is just sort of showing, kind of the national actuarial averages, or for individual women, individual men, couples, right? That you need to keep track of life expectancy, because that's one of the most important variables when thinking about how much money do I need to fund for how many years. So we often get a lot of questions around annuities, and that annuities can be an entire own separate presentation. There's a lot of nuances and different kinds. For purposes of this presentation, we're really sort of just talking about annuities as a potential complement to kind of Social Security income and pension income. I think both Alp and I talked about it in that context a little bit earlier, right? They can be a source of that kind of guaranteed income to help cover the basic needs, right? So if you need $10,000 a month for basic needs, and your Social Security and pensions combined are $8,000, some people like to have that security of saying, you know what, I want to invest in or purchase an annuity that's going to derive that remaining $2,000, right, a month of income, so that I know, hey, my basic needs are covered. Having said that, and right, as I said, there's so much more we could talk about for annuities, right? But that is kind of the one potential strategy for using annuities. But it's really important to know that annuities can get really complicated and expensive in many cases, right? So this is especially true when you start introducing what are referred to as riders, right? Sort of guarantees of some sort is how the insurance companies who offer annuities refer to them, right? Where you're essentially adding benefits and costs to the base features of the annuity, right? So that they can talk about sort of guaranteed income riders, guaranteed death benefit riders. These are all sorts of things that kind of add potential benefits, but also add cost to it. So I'll just say that the old adage of, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is, definitely applies to annuities. So before you kind of invest in an annuity, take a step back. Maybe sometimes a second opinion is worthwhile as well. I've talked a little bit about Social Security. We have more than one. We have 2, maybe 3 separate presentations just on Social Security. There's a lot to it. You can check out some of our recordings or tune into a future presentation, as this is always a popular one. But again, in the context of this presentation, it's a really important, valuable source of income that, even though there's a lot of bad press out there, right, about how Social Security is running out of money, how it's going to go away, we are firm believers that it's going to continue to be an important source of income for all Americans in retirement.
It just has to last for the rest of my life.
I'm even confident that I'm going to get Social Security, but I'm also confident that the rules and when I'm eligible for it and the benefits calculation, that's going to change.
And it should.
Yep. This is just like I said, we'll send out the recording along with the slides, so everybody will have these. I know we're moving quickly here, right? Just kind of pointing out that important things to keep in mind. Social Security, you can file as early as age 62. You can file as late as age 70 or anywhere in between. It's most often referred to as kind of your full retirement age. So based on your birth year, as you see here on the slide, your full retirement age is anywhere between 66 and 67. So if you're born between 55 and 1959, it actually goes up in 2-month increments. That's what that middle row is representing. Like I just mentioned before, born 1960 and later, I'm in that category. Under current law, my full retirement age is 67. I don't expect it to actually be that when I get into my 60s. I expect that to be pushed back just based on life expectancy, right?
And I
People
think
are living longer.
the real benefit of the slide is like you can see the benefit increases if you delay it past your full retirement age. And again, you have to think about your own life expectancy, of course, but there is a valuable benefit there if you delay taking Social Security and you end up living a long life.
Absolutely. We see that a lot in practice. And here's kind of a visual representation of that, right? So this is just kind of, as I mentioned, you can file as early as 62, wait as late as 70. So if we assume sort of that's the baseline, right? Hey, I can start getting something as early as 62. Well, here's sort of shows just one example of sort of a dollar amount. And these are kind of national, kind of sort of some of the examples that we see out there. Right, full retirement of age of 66 with a 31.48 a month benefit. Right, if you start it early, it's reduced. But I kind of like looking at the percentages here that show like, oh, if I wait, here's that kind of guaranteed rate of return, right? That you're going to get by being able to, if you can afford to, wait to start your Social Security at age 70. Right, so as Alp said, that can be a really valuable piece to the puzzle if you are able to wait. All right, moving quickly here. Pensions, I'm just going to leave it at, hey, talk to us if you're eligible for a pension and you have questions. I know it doesn't apply to everybody, but I'm going to highlight one point here is just really thinking about, make sure you understand, kind of risk management. Hey, what happens to your benefit if something were to happen to you before you retire and before you've made that pension election? That sometimes gets overlooked, to make sure that, right, you're sort of thinking that through around the pension itself, but also potentially hedging that risk through life insurance.
And to Jason's point, it's an important decision. It's an irrevocable decision when you actually pick a survivor benefit.
Yep. So thinking about, right, insurance in retirement. Again, we have separate presentations on these individual topics, right? So there's a lot to it, but really for today's presentation, it's really kind of thinking about sort of the need for life and then disability insurance. I'll kind of cover them both here in one quick overview. If you think about it, right, primarily we get life insurance and disability insurance during our working years to cover the risk, all right, to our loved ones and our family members who are kind of dependent on our income, right? So if I die and that income is gone, I have life insurance, right, to protect against that risk. Or if I'm disabled and might lose that income, right, I have disability insurance to protect against that risk, right? So sort of the basic idea is, oh, as I get closer to retirement or into retirement where there's no longer income, right, coming in from work, generally the need for life insurance and disability dissipates, right, or potentially goes away entirely. That said, life insurance in particular, sometimes there might be a pension to hedge against. Some people think about their Social Security, right? That, hey, if maybe if you're married in retirement and both of you have strong Social Securities, keep in mind if one of you passes away, one of the Social Securities goes away, right? That the surviving spouse gets to keep the higher of the two, right? Whether it's their own or the deceased spouse's Social Security benefits, but one of them will go away. So sometimes we see folks that say, wow, that was a really important piece to covering the lifestyle expenses. They hedge even Social Security with life insurance. So just some of the other kind of things to think about. Disability insurance, one other comment I'll just kind of make is sometimes folks get into their early 60s and we often get asked is, do I still need to keep my disability insurance? Sometimes the answer is no, right? Because if you've built up a good, strong, emergency savings, and you're in a good position where you could retire, right? But you're still working. And most disability policies only pay until age 65 or 2 years, right? Whichever is kind of longer. So a lot of times folks will say, you know what, I can take on that risk and just drop the disability insurance. But before
case by case.
Yep, absolutely, case by case. And before you drop any insurance, right, you really need to kind of assess your overall financial situation, but also your health situation, right? Before you drop any kind of disability or life insurance. Long-term care insurance, again, a really big topic. But it is one of those really important ones to keep in mind around expenses in retirement. The most important thing we can say is have a plan for what if you or your spouse or loved one needs long-term care, right? And the other thing that's really important to keep in mind is long-term care is not health care, right? So Medicare, which is health insurance in retirement, does not pay for long-term care. Probably one of the most common misunderstandings, right? Doctors will, right, and health insurance is meant to, right, provide you protection for things that you're expected to get better from, right? Whereas long-term care insurance kicks in for what's referred to as custodial or maintenance care, right? So if a doctor basically says that, hey, your ailment is not something that you're expected to get better from, right? Think things like cognitive impairments, right? Alzheimer's, dementia, right, or physical impairments, right, that you're not expected to get better from, but you need assistance, right, that custodial care. That's where long-term care insurance can come into, or at least having a plan to cover those expenses, right? So that could be through other income sources. It could be, for some folks, it might be, downsizing a second home, right? But just make sure you think that through and incorporate it into, right, the income needs and retirement plan. And then lastly here, just always like to reiterate the importance of thinking about your beneficiary designations, right? We've talked about all kinds of different retirement accounts that all have beneficiary designations, right? Generally speaking, if you're married, you name a spouse, right, or your significant other as the primary beneficiary. If you have children, oftentimes they are named as contingent or secondary beneficiaries. But the most important thing I want to say here is review them and update them. we have run into instances where folks still name an ex-spouse. Don't run into that scenario. Or they've had multiple children, but they only have the eldest child listed on the beneficiary designations, right? But also it's important, right, to think about your overall estate planning, right? So if you're updating wills, or maybe you've incorporated a trust, the beneficiary designations are all a part of that kind of conversation, and all the kinds of things that we can help you think through, what's appropriate for you in your situation. So I know we ran over a little bit, but hopefully you're okay with that, because I know we got a lot of great questions, so we always appreciate that. So as I mentioned before, we have a lot of recordings of various presentations. On pretty much every slide we had in here, there's a separate recording of a presentation that goes deeper into that topic. So please check it out. Send us follow-up notes. Give us feedback on the presentation. We always appreciate that. Here's our team, so you can reach out to Alp or me, or go to our website, right, and contact us. So yeah, and we will be emailing a recording of the presentation. So really appreciate everybody sticking with us today. Hope everyone stays safe, and be well. Take care, everyone.
Bye.